Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to dive into something, well, pretty wild. It's an argument, pulled straight from official government records, that questions how the United States is really governed.
Okay, let's just jump right in with this quote. Read that. This isn't from some fringe blog. This is from a U.S. Senate report. A Senate committee, back in 1973, flat out said that the president has powers that let him rule without using normal constitutional processes. Wow.
So that immediately begs the question, right? How on earth is that possible? How could Congress itself conclude that a system of rule exists outside the Constitution? Well, to get to the bottom of that, we actually have to go back in time. Not to 73, but 40 years earlier, smack dab in the middle of the Great Depression.
All right, before we get into the weeds, let's set the stage. We need to start with the official story. You know, the version of government we all learn about, the one we're told is how things work. And that official story is pretty simple, right? It's what you learned in civics class. The U.S. government runs according to the Constitution. You've got your three branches: Congress, the president, the courts, all separate, all balancing each other out. It's the whole foundation of the system.
Okay, so that's the baseline. That's our presumption of constitutional government. But now let's get to the heart of the argument. According to the source material we're looking at, one single act of Congress kind of threw a wrench in the whole thing. And here's the crazy part. It wasn't even a brand new law. It was just a little change to an old law meant for war, but it was used during peacetime. So the story kicks off back in 1917 with this law, the Trading with the Enemy Act. As the name suggests, it gave the president special powers, but only during time of war. Pretty straightforward. But then 1933 happens. The banks are collapsing, it's a full-blown crisis, and Congress rushes to pass the Emergency Banking Act. And in that act, they made a critical and kind of sneaky change to that old wartime law. And here it is. This is the legislative switch. This is the whole ballgame. Look at the before and after. They just added 10 little words. Or, during any other period of national emergency declared by the president. Boom. Just like that, a law that was chained to wartime was set free. Now, all the president had to do was declare a national emergency, and he could unlock those same powers. The wartime connection was completely severed. And believe me, this didn't go unnoticed. People were screaming about it at the time. This quote from Representative Lundin says it all. He claimed the bill was railroaded through the House in about 40 minutes. He said members were voting on something they hadn't even had a chance to read. His point was clear. This was not normal lawmaking.
Okay, let's jump ahead in our timeline. 40 years have passed. It's 1973, and a special Senate committee is formed to investigate this whole national emergency thing. They start looking back, tracing the long-term effects of that one little change made back in 1933. And what they uncover, well, it's pretty explosive.
Yeah, their report is where that quote from the beginning came from. And they didn't pull any punches. They stated in black and white that a national emergency had existed continuously since March 9th, 1933. And here's the kicker. It had never been terminated. For 40 years, the emergency was still technically on, meaning all those special statutes were still active.
And we're not talking about one or two laws here. The scale is just staggering. The Senate committee identified 470 separate federal statutes that were just sitting there, activated by this ongoing state of emergency. A whole library of extra constitutional powers just waiting on the shelf.
And these weren't minor powers, at all. We're talking about the authority to do some seriously heavy-duty stuff. Seize property, control entire industries, take over all transportation and communication, even declare martial law. The committee's own words were that these powers could control the lives of citizens in all-encompassing ways. It's a lot.
So, what we have here is what the source calls a constitutional collision. It's this idea that you have two fundamentally different systems of rule existing at the same time in the same country, and they are on a direct collision course. Just look at this table. It really lays it all out. Under constitutional rule, authority comes from, well, the Constitution. Rights are protected, power is separated. But under the so-called emergency rule, authority comes from a presidential declaration. Rights can be abridged, and power gets centralized in the executive. They are polar opposites, two totally different philosophies of government. And what's really interesting is that the source highlights a Supreme Court case from 1934, just a year after the act was passed. The court made this very subtle but absolutely crucial distinction. They said, look,
An emergency can't just create power out of thin air, but it can provide the occasion, their word, to use powers that Congress has already granted. It's like the emergency is the key that unlocks a door that was already built. So this all leads to a pretty big and, honestly, pretty unsettling question about the nature of American government today. It's the final point the source material drives home. So, to wrap it all up, the core argument we've been exploring is this. That simple amendment back in 1933 didn't just deal with a banking crisis. It created a parallel track for governing, an emergency rule system. And, according to Congress's own investigation, that system was never turned off. It's been running in the background ever since. Which brings us to the final provocative question posed by the source. If you have this system of emergency rule that can essentially replace the Constitution, which one are we living under today? Has the exception, the emergency, become the permanent rule? That's the powerful idea we're left to think about.